In the quiet vault at the Conservation Laboratory of the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign rests a manuscript written by Sir Isaac Newton, not on gravity or optics, but on alchemy. A centuries-old attempt to understand transformation and to grasp the mystery of the Philosopher's Stone. The Philosopher's Stone was a famed substance of alchemical inquiry. In addition to granting the maker endless wealth through the ability to transmute lead to gold, it was also purported to yield an elixir of life, which would allow both longevity as well as a panacea that healed all illnesses. What lies within this box is a 3-page document written in Newton's own hand. The paper bears his dense, hurried script, Latin text, corrections, thoughts in motion. Each sheet tells of an intellect working at the edge of both science and faith. But that's not all. Also contained within the ink is a complex and problematic chemistry that poses significant consequences for our valuable historic documents, the answer to which is almost as magical as turning lead to gold. Sir Isaac Newton was born in 1642 in Woolsthorpe, Lincolnshire. When we think of Newton, we think of physics, of falling apples and universal laws. But Newton also devoted tens of thousands of words to alchemy. He copied recipes, he analyzed reactions, and he searched for the invisible forces that shape matter itself. Alchemy shares linguistic and practical roots with the modern discipline of chemistry, but with one significant difference. Rather than seeking the rigorous, if somewhat Spartan, explanation of matter based on scientific observation alone, alchemy sought to uncover the composition of the universe, but is made by God. Not physics, but metaphysics. In his private chambers at Trinity College, Cambridge, he built a laboratory of brick and glass lined with crucibles, furnaces, distillation vessels. He designed and constructed his own furnace, which he regulated with flame and bellows and coal, the air thick with the scent of sulfur and mercury. Newton also worked in secrecy, often through the night, his manuscripts coded and his experiments concealed. To him, the transmutation of metals and the transformation of knowledge were bound by the same pursuit, to uncover the hidden architecture of the universe. This manuscript, now known as Opus Galli Anonymi, is Newton's Latin translation of an anonymous French work describing the preparation of the Philosopher's Stone. There is no known attributed source for the original text. The closest we know of may be the writings of a man called Pierre-Jean Fabre, a 17th century physician to the King of France. Regardless, the many corrections and additions in Newton's own hand revealed that he was not just translating. He was an interpreter, reworking each line through the lens of experiment and faith. We don't know exactly what Newton hoped to find, whether it was a perfection of matter, the transmutation of metals, or maybe just a glimpse of divine order through chemistry. In any case, he never published on alchemy, though his personal papers suggest it was a topic with which he had an endless fascination. But why alchemy? What was it about this ancient subject that captured Newton's interest? Sir Isaac Newton was, in essence, a philosopher as much as a scientist. His curiosity stemmed from a drive to understand how and why the forces of nature functioned, and then in turn, how the human experience perceived it. We don't think that he was seeking wealth by turning lead into gold, nor eternal life. We are certain that what he desired was the knowledge to attain the deepest understanding of nature and the spirit. After Newton's death in 1727, the manuscript passed to his half-niece, Catherine Barton, and her husband, John Conduit, then to their descendants, the Wallop family, Earls of Portsmouth. For nearly 2 centuries, Newton's alchemical papers just rested in the family's library. Then in 1936, they were sold at Sotheby's, where Lot 67, Opus Galli Anonymi, was purchased by Emmanuel Fabius, a Parisian bookseller. Newton's alchemical manuscript was publicly sold again at a Bonhams auction in New York in 2018. That's when the Rare Book and Manuscript Library of the University of Illinois acquired the document as a part of a gift from alumni Jim and Lionel Elsesser. Almost as soon as it arrived, we could see both its value as a single record of inquiry and just how fragile the document was itself. From Newton's hand to Fabius's shelf to this conservation bench, a line unbroken by time. Iron-gall ink is arguably the most important ink in Western history. From the late Middle Ages into the 20th century, it wrote laws, music, voyages, and private thoughts in a line so permanent it could outlast its makers. You don't need to spend much time in an archive or a special collection to come across iron-gall ink. Our earliest records show this type of media being used on papyri from the 1st centuries AD. It was cheap and relatively easy to make yourself. When it was fresh, it yielded a rich blue-black writing ink. And probably most importantly, it was considered indelible, meaning that once dry, it did not fade and it did not bleed. From Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks and Bach's musical scores to the US Constitution, iron-gall ink is found in precious historical documents in collections all over the world. Iron-gall ink was made primarily from galls, irregular growths from insect activity, harvested from the branches of oak trees. Acid-rich tannins leached from the galls were then combined with iron sulfate to create a chemical reaction that yielded the rich ink color. It was then mixed with gum arabic for flow and water or wine as a base. Freshly written, this ink could look pale gray, but then darken as oxygen transformed it into a deep blue-black over time. This type of ink was developed for writing on parchment, where the acidic bite of the ink was actually an asset in making a lasting document, such as writs of law and governance. The chemistry behind iron-gall ink reaches back all the way to antiquity, noted by Pliny the Elder for how tannins and iron salts darkened over time.
The fraud may be detected using a leaf of papyrus, which has been steeped in an infusion of nut galls. It immediately turns black when adulterated verdigris is applied.
Centuries later, this knowledge traveled across lands and across languages, from documentation by 5th century Roman scholars to 12th century medieval household manuals. Recipes could vary widely depending on regional or cultural practices. The earliest example of a precise formula for iron-gall ink was not even codified until the 17th century, when the Dutch East India Company created trade specifications for the ink to ensure consistency, quality, and durability across its global operations. Through these records, we see how ink, once just a humble and bespoke craft of oak and iron and gum, became a global vehicle for documentation, exploration, and empire.
Though iron-gall ink was valued for its indelible qualities throughout history, the passage of time has revealed a fatal flaw. When applied to paper, that same acidic bite that made the iron-gall ink ideal for writing on parchment instead creates a corrosive environment that can lead to discoloration, instability, and loss. We have centuries of the human record documented in this ink that was made at home with random ingredient additions, applied to paper stock of varied origin, stored for decades in poorly controlled environments like basements and attics. And this combination of factors has resulted in significant chemical and physical degradation, which we see in many of our collection items today. And in fact, depending on how the ink was prepared, whether the support is paper or parchment, and how the document is stored, iron-gall ink can literally wear away the material to which it's applied in a process called iron-gall ink corrosion. What we observe over time is that the ink color shifts from blue-black to a warm brown. A brownish halo appears around the written lines, and eventually this discoloration becomes visible even from the reverse side of the page. As this process advances, handwritten strokes of ink can crack, they can flake away, and they can eat completely through the paper support. So what is actually happening chemically to create this serious preservation problem? What we see with iron-gall ink corrosion is actually multiple chemical reactions that are occurring simultaneously. So iron-gall ink corrodes paper through two primary chemical processes. We have iron-catalyzed oxidation and acid hydrolysis. iron in the ink ages in essentially an oxidation reaction, the same that you would encounter on your car if you have a rust spot. Exposed to air and humidity over time, the iron in the ink weakens. It transforms into iron oxide, or rust. And to make matters worse, combining the tannins and iron sulfate during iron-gall ink production releases sulfuric acid, meaning that iron-gall ink is extremely acidic to begin with. That acid in the ink breaks down the cellulose fibers in the paper. And if the particular recipe for iron-gall ink happens to yield an ink that has high or excessive iron-2 ions, those ions catalyze additional oxidation of the paper's support. Simultaneously, the paper is undergoing its own process of aging. As the paper components like cellulose and lignin in the case of wood pulp paper oxidize, the acidity of the paper increases, and this presence of free acid within the paper causes a type of breakdown known as acid hydrolysis. You can picture it like a pair of scissors. The acid is cutting these long chain cellulose polymers that paper is made of, and that results in weakness. And this process is also accelerated by exposure to lights, pollutants, and high humidity. So taken together, these internal chemical reactions can both speed up and intensify the degradation, resulting in paper that we can see as yellowed or discolored or embrittled, inked areas that are cracking or crumbling. And unfortunately, gone unchecked, the interaction of iron-gall ink and paper can corrode important documents beyond the possibility of retrieval. So this chemically fraught ink, though once considered indelible, is slowly turning centuries of human records into dust in the wind. So what can we do? For stable documents that are saved in institutional collections, the most effective long-term strategy comes in the form of careful handling and storage in a stable and controlled environment. So for paper-based objects, the ideal conditions are a temperature between 64 and 72 degrees Fahrenheit and a relative humidity of 30 to 50% with minimal fluctuations. And what about documents that are already showing more advanced signs of iron-gall ink corrosion? When an object is considered at risk, conservators carefully evaluate the available treatment options. And the decision to treat an object is not taken lightly because every intervention comes with trade-offs. Treatments can alter materials in ways that may complicate future analysis or conservation treatment. But when an object is actively degrading, as in the case of Opus Galli Anonymi, intervention may be determined to be the most ethical course of action to safeguard both the material integrity and the historical meaning of a document. Before the treatment begins, let's pause for a moment to take a look at our space, where we preserve our most delicate objects. This is our conservation laboratory, a place dedicated to the preservation of history's fragile artifacts. Here, conservators work with paper, books, maps, and photographs, each carrying its own voice and story from the past. And it's here, in this quiet space, that the conservation journey of the Opus Galli Anonymi, Newton's alchemical manuscript, begins. Before a single drop of water touches the paper, we start with a series of physical and chemical analyses. First, we prepare written documentation, which includes a detailed written description of the item, a condition report, test results, and a proposed treatment plan. And of course, we photograph the manuscript exactly as it is when it arrives in the lab. These steps are essential. Every fiber, every stain, every mark is recorded, and this is the visual evidence of the manuscript's condition before any intervention begins. One of the very first things we do is a simple solubility test. So the goal is pretty easy to understand. We just want to know if the ink will stay in place or if it will start to move when it comes into contact with the solvents that we're going to use later in treatment. So for this manuscript, the Opus Galli Anonymi, we test 3 mixtures: deionized water, a 50-50 mix of deionized water and ethanol, and just pure ethanol. And we repeat this small test in different areas of the text and on different pages because each sheet can react in its own way. It's possible that the same ink was not used throughout the entire document. It might be a different batch. If the ink does not move, then that's great. We know that our treatment will be safe. But if it starts to shift or transfer, then we're going to adjust our approach before going any further with the treatment. Next, we test for free iron ions using bathophenanthroline indicator test strips. When the strip touches the surface and turns magenta, that tells us that there's still active iron at work, actively corroding the document, and we'll need to stabilize it with our conservation treatment. If there's no color change, or if it's just a very faint pink, then we'll adapt our plan so that we don't intervene more than necessary. After that, we look at the manuscript under transmitted light and ultraviolet light. And this kind of lighting reveals things that the eye can't normally see under ambient light, like faint halos around the letters, weakened areas, or areas that have been affected by exposure to water in the past. And this all helps us to understand how far the degradation process has progressed. And when we go even closer under the microscope, the hidden world of the ink appears. We can see how it sinks into the fibers, how it leaves tiny deposits or crystalline residues, and sometimes even small grains of sand that were sprinkled on the page centuries ago to help the wet ink dry. Each test adds a piece to the puzzle, and together they guide every decision we make, balancing chemistry, care, and the long-term preservation of this remarkable document. The visual and chemical analysis of the document reveals a critical problem, which is the iron-gall ink is actively corroding the paper and accelerating its natural aging. If the document is not treated at this stage, it will continue to lose its remaining stability, and this deterioration is irreversible. It will only worsen over time. To halt this process, a targeted conservation treatment is required. This treatment focuses on two essential goals. First, the corrosive activity of the ink must be stabilized, and second, the ongoing deterioration of the paper must be controlled. Because these processes involve different chemical reactions, they must be carried out in separate steps. In documents written with iron-gall ink, the ink is stabilized using a calcium phytate solution, while the paper is stabilized with calcium bicarbonate. Each treatment targets a different component of the document, and both are necessary to ensure the long-term stability of the document. With these treatment goals in mind, and with the approval of our conservation team and the collection manager, we developed the following treatment plan. Surface cleaning to remove dirt and surface debris. Aqueous washing to remove the soluble paper degradation products and some of the corrosive ink compounds. Then chemical stabilization of the ink using a calcium phytate solution, which will chelate or lock down those free iron ions that are damaging the paper. Then chemical stabilization of the paper using calcium bicarbonate solution, which will stabilize the paper's pH and create an alkaline reserve. And finally, physical stabilization of the paper through sizing, the repair of tears and weak areas, flattening, and finally drying. In the following sections, we'll walk through each stage of the treatment step by step, but for a deeper understanding of any part of the process, feel free to explore our other videos on iron-gall ink conservation, where each treatment is explained in greater detail on our YouTube channel. Surface cleaning is the process of removing any loose surface soil or dust particles that have settled on the document over time. I'm going to do that mechanically, and we can use different kinds of erasers, different hand tools. And for this document, because it's so fragile, I'm going to be using just this very soft brush. It's important to remove the loose surface dirt before washing because the water used in aqueous treatment will actually drive those particles further into the paper, making them harder to remove, and that can be damaging to the paper. So my goal is just to remove what I can safely. I'm going to work around the ink So for the sheets that have a lot more ink on them, I will probably not be touching a lot of the paper, but in this case, there's a lot of paper with no media on it. And I can come in with this soft brush. I'll hold the document so that it doesn't move when I start brushing it. And I'm just gonna work very, very lightly, using very light, gentle movements across the surface of the paper, brushing those loose particles away. And sometimes there's a pretty dramatic visual shift in an object as you're surface cleaning it. I'm really not expecting that in this case. We don't have a lot of soot or accumulated gunk on the top of the paper that's just going to come off really easily. I'm really not expecting a visual shift in this piece, but I'm just going to work my way around this whole side of the sheet, and then I'll flip it over and do the same on the reverse. As you can see, this leaf has considerably more ink on it than the last one I surface cleaned, which means that a lot of the surface of this paper I'm actually really not going to touch in this process, again, because I want to avoid removing any ink and any components of the ink that might be loose on the surface. So I can go in again with a brush, but this time I've brought out some smaller brushes. So I can just work, I'll go along the edges, and again, just very lightly brushing and avoiding the media and using a lot of caution around any areas that might have breaks or tears. And this may not look like a very fruitful process. I'm touching a very small area of the paper, and there's not a lot of visual change happening. But again, it's so important that we do this step before washing so that the contaminants on the surface that we just don't see with our naked eye are not driven further into the paper. Because immersion in water temporarily weakens the paper fibers, the document becomes more delicate and susceptible to damage. And for this reason, it has to be carefully prepared and protected in advance. So in this case, a support system is used during treatment to reduce the mechanical stress and help minimize the risk of damage. Let's take a look at the full process in the following section. I have here a rigid acrylic support with a layer of silicone release mylar and a non-woven polyester film laid over top. And this is the setup that we will use to support the document during washing. I have it sitting on a sheet of silicone release mylar, which is going to allow for any small adjustments that we need to make while the piece is wet. It will also allow the paper to shift around as the fibers wet out and the paper fibers expand. We don't want it to catch on anything and be hindered in its movement at all. So I have this 50-50 solution of deionized water and ethanol, which I'm going to use to very gently mist out the document. I'm wetting it gradually so that it's not shocked by a quick introduction to water. I don't want the paper to very suddenly expand in some places and not in other places like the heavily inked areas that can cause fractures or make existing tears worse. And I'm misting it and then just looking, watching, and when it looks like it's fully wetted out, we can shift it into the bath. See the paper starting to curl a little bit in some areas, reacting to the water. And I see the paper starting to relax again now, and that's what I'm waiting for. I want it to be wetted out, relaxed, and flattened so that I can then cover it up and have it protected and put it into the bath without it shifting around on me. Add these Vivac clips. These are plastic, not metal, specifically because we need to be very careful not to introduce any metals into the wash water. It can alter the results of our testing. The document is protected by this remay. It's not going to move when we put it into the bath, It's very well supported, and it is safe and ready for the washing process. In this stage of the process, the goal is to remove the soluble paper degradation products that are formed both by internal or inherent to the paper or ink, or external, like environmental chemical reactions. Over time, these degradation products can discolor the paper, often producing a yellowish tone that may be subtle or in some cases is actually quite pronounced. Many of these degradation products are water soluble. So when the paper is immersed in water, they dissolve, they flow out into the water, which we'll see may gradually turn yellow during the treatment. In documents written with iron-gall ink, some of those corrosive ink components are also partially water-soluble. So during the aqueous treatment, these soluble compounds can also be reduced or removed, helping to slow the further deterioration of the paper. And removing as much soluble degradation as possible is essential, as it also allows the next treatment step, the chelation of the free iron ions with calcium phytate solution, to be more effective. For washing, we use deionized water slightly alkalinized with calcium hydroxide. Because very pure water actually has a really high dissolving capacity and can be too aggressive for historical paper. It can affect the ink and the paper structure. So adjusting the pH makes the washing process gentler and safer for the document. I've prepared a bath of deionized water that's been recalcified with calcium hydroxide. And we've also added some ethanol to the bath. And again, the ethanol just helps the paper wet out more evenly and more gently. And I'm just going to gently place the document on its rigid support into the water and slowly submerge it. And with these clips and our rigid support, it shouldn't move. It's really held in place very securely. You can see how nicely and evenly that wetted out. That's probably the alcohol at work. And this will stay in this first water bath for 5 or 10 minutes. I'm waiting to see if the degradation products, we'll see some yellow discoloration that is water soluble will start to move out of the paper and into the bath. The bath water generally starts to shift to a more yellowish brown color. And once it reaches equilibrium, once the water is saturated with whatever degradation products are coming out of the paper, we can switch it over to a fresh bath if necessary. I'm wearing gloves for this process. It's important not to have any jewelry, any metals come in contact with the wash water. It can affect the process. And obviously I don't want my bare hands on the piece either. Document has been washing now for about 40 minutes. This is the fourth water bath. And at this point, I'm satisfied that I've gotten most of the water-soluble degradation products out. This last bath has barely changed color at all. So at this point, I'm ready to remove it from this bath and we'll move on to the actual phytate treatment. As mentioned earlier in this video, the main problem with iron-gall ink is its corrosive effect on paper, which is caused by an excess of free iron ions in the form of iron-2 and iron-3. Most of the water-soluble iron-2 was removed during the previous washing stage, but some iron-2 does remain along with the insoluble iron-3, both of which can continue to catalyze degradation. So to stop this process, these remaining ions are now chelated using a calcium phytate solution, forming stable complexes that no longer damage the paper. Let's take a closer look at this stage of the treatment. At this point, I'm going to put the document in the first phytate bath. The calcium phytate in this solution will bond with the free iron, forming complexes that can either be washed away in the water bath or that are stable and won't contribute to further corrosion. I'll have the document in here for about 10 minutes, and then I will check using the bathophenanthroline indicator test strips. Those will tell me whether there is any free iron still present, and if so, we will continue the bath for another 10 minutes. Up to a maximum of 30 minutes. And at that point, the phytate solution is spent. And if it's necessary to continue, we'll start with new phytate solution. I've just removed the document from its third round in the calcium phytate bath, so a total of 30 minutes now. And I'm going to test one more time. Sodium dithionite. See if we have any iron-3. And if it doesn't turn pink, that means we can be done with the calcium phytate solution. I'm not seeing any pink. That's exciting. I didn't see any iron-3 on the indicator paper, but I'm going to now test several other spots on the paper, both inked areas and uninked areas, just to make sure that all of our results come back as clear for iron-3. So far, the indicator strips have not changed color, which tells me that the free iron ions, have either been washed away or locked down in an iron phytate complex, so they can no longer do damage. Immersing the document in a calcium bicarbonate solution creates an alkaline reserve within the paper. This reserve provides long-term chemical stabilization by slowing the natural paper degradation and preventing the formation of acidity, which can break down the cellulose chains and weaken the paper. Any remaining acidity still present in the paper is also neutralized during this stage. Let's take a closer look at this chemical process. The next step is to put the document in a solution of calcium bicarbonate. I'm going to flip this piece over, actually, because there's a lot of carbonation in this water, and the bubbles would lift the paper up off the support if they could. This will leave an alkaline reserve in the document and hopefully keep the paper safe and in good condition for many, many years. The document has now been in the calcium bicarbonate bath for half an hour. It's time to remove it, and I will let it sit and rest until it is just barely damp, and then we'll move on to the sizing process. Sizing is a thin adhesive layer, often gelatin, applied to paper to control how the ink is absorbed and spreads. Historically, sizing could have been added during the formation of the paper sheet, or applied later after the sheet had dried. It just depends on the region and the period. In early modern European paper making, so this would have produced the paper used by Newton, sizing was most often applied after the sheet had dried using an animal glue, gelatin. And this surface sizing created a protective layer that made writing with iron-gall ink possible by preventing the ink from bleeding into the paper fibers. Documents that were gelatin sized before writing are naturally more resistant to iron-gall ink corrosion because that gelatin forms a thin barrier around the paper fibers. The ink penetrates less deeply, and this allows the paper to retain greater strength and flexibility. This early sizing doesn't stop the degradation, but it does slow the chemical reaction and delays the structural damage. At this stage, after the aqueous treatments, part of the paper's original sizing has been lost. And while it's difficult to quantify exactly how much of the sizing is removed during these processes, it is important to reintroduce a controlled amount to restore the strength of the paper fibers and help to protect the ink. We'll take a closer look at this step in the next section. The document has now had some time to air dry just a bit, and we're ready to start sizing. We are assuming that the bathing process, the washing process that we went through with this piece, has removed any sizing that was still left within the paper. So I'll be brushing more on. That will help to coat the paper fibers. It will make the sheet more robust and hopefully just give it more strength and keep it safe and protected. It can also help to slow down the process of corrosion and degradation. I'm also going to be sizing 2 tiny little bits. These are fragments that were already separated from the piece when it came to us. And I'm going to size them in the same way, just a much smaller scale, so that then they can be rejoined with the original. And just slant this just a bit. And then pour on the gelatin. This is 1.5% gelatin solution. And I'm going to let it run over the document. And then I will brush it for a couple of minutes to make sure that the paper is saturated. Having it slanted like this also helps to avoid any pooling of the gelatin size. And just moving the brush very gently across the surface, keeping it saturated with our gelatin solution. I'll do one more pass here. And then I will set the piece to drain on a slant, again to make sure that there's no gelatin pooling on the surface. When a document is gelatin sized as part of a conservation treatment, the effect is different from the original sizing. Gelatin can't reverse the existing iron-gall ink damage, but it does reinforce weakened fibers and it improves the paper's flexibility. It also forms a thin protein film that partially coats the ink, which reduces its direct contact with the paper. It's not a full encapsulation of the ink, but it does create a gentle barrier, and this helps slow corrosion and helps the paper to withstand future deterioration. The excess gelatin has drained off now, and I'm going to continue with a blotting stage. I'm going to use some Tech Wipe, which is an absorbent. It's kind of a paper towel, and place it over top of the document. And just gently start to blot away the excess. I really want this to be wetted out very evenly. I don't want any puddles of size, which would dry stiff, kind of crispy. I'm now set up to mend this document using a remoistenable repair tissue that was actually made here in the conservation lab. It's a 5-gram Tengujo tissue that's been coated with a mixture of Lasco 303 acrylic adhesive and wheat starch paste. We can apply a very thin film of adhesive to this tissue, allow it to dry, and then when it comes in contact with moisture that's on the paper from the sizing process, it will reactivate that adhesive without us having to add any additional water or adhesive. And I actually have 2 colors here. It's maybe hard to see the difference between them, but we noticed that with these documents, all 3 sheets are a little bit darker on one side than on the other. And they looked like that before we washed them. We thought perhaps it would balance out with washing, but one side actually remains a little bit darker on all of these. So I have one tissue that has been just slightly toned, a little bit darker so that it blends better on that side. I have some transmitted light set up underneath the document, which helps me to see any cracks in the paper. For example, I can see a crack right here along the center fold going about 4 centimeters up from this edge. I will start mending that one. And because I am on the lighter side of the document, I'm using the untoned repair tissue. I'll estimate how long I need this piece to be and use a wet brush, just wet with water, to wet out a line, and then I can tear this tissue off nicely. And it leaves me with a really fine feathered edge that helps to visually integrate the repair and also helps to make it a stronger repair. I'll make sure that I know which side the adhesive is on. It should be facing the paper. Make sure my torn edge looks nice. Just kind of even those fibers out a little bit. They can clump sometimes. And I will lay this down. So this tear extends up to right about here. I'm going to lay my tissue down. So that it just overlaps that area. And then I have a strip of polyethylene strapping that I can put down and gently burnish over the top. Again, not using a lot of pressure, but to make sure I have full contact and that the moisture is reactivating that adhesive. And now I will remove this strip of polyethylene and take a look at my repair under magnification. I want to make sure that all those little fibrous edges are tacked down. I'm just using a dry brush to fan those fibers out. Make sure everything looks aligned. I'm happy with how that looks. And this will dry quite quickly. We've now completed the mending process on this document. It's just slightly damp and it's ready to go into the final drying stack. So I have it here sitting on a stack of rigid board supports, topped with a layer of cotton blotter paper and this spun polyester fabric, which will help prevent the document from sticking to anything else in the stack. And I have the document here. I'm going to top it with another sheet of polyester. This is permeable, so the moisture can escape through it. And on top of that, my cotton blotter paper. Several layers of corrugated board, which is rigid but also allows air to move through the stack as this dries. And then a little pile of rigid board, and I'll top this off with some signage so that everyone knows what's sitting here under this stack, and a sheet of acrylic for some weight. And this will now sit under weight for several days, maybe a couple of weeks, until it's nice and dry and flat. We'll see how it looks then. The documents have been drying now under weight for a couple of weeks, and it's time to see how they look. Remove our board supports, our cotton blotter. And here's the first sheet. And it looks beautiful. It's really nice and flat. The mends have blended in nicely. You can see them, which is fine up close, but they're not distracting at all. It looks beautiful. It's really exciting. We've now finished treatment of the Newton manuscript. It is really back where it started in conservation, which is the documentation stage. So we will carefully write down everything that was done in the course of treatment. We will record all of our test results. We will also take photographs of the document post-treatment so that we have those before and afters to compare, and those may be relevant down the road to a researcher. They may have questions we haven't even thought of yet. And then that documentation will all be bundled and really kept in perpetuity, hopefully, so that there will always be a document accompanying the manuscript, outlining everything that was done to it in the course of conservation treatment. This was not a particularly complicated treatment to actually perform. The steps were all planned out ahead of time. We knew what we were going to be doing, and it all went more or less to plan. We've ended up with a document that visually does not differ much from the way it looked before treatment. The paper is a little bit brighter. We did reduce the yellowing somewhat. But for the most part, we just know that on a chemical level, the document is now stable. It's in a condition that should allow it to persist for many years to come. And we have done everything in our power with the knowledge we have at this point to ensure its longevity and access. I think as conservators, we all have our favorite projects. We all have the treatments that really resonated with us. This particular treatment for me was a really interesting one because, of course, being an Isaac Newton manuscript, there's some prestige associated with it, some additional stress perhaps. But my experience with this document, because the treatment was so well planned out, everything was really very controlled, what I actually got was a lot of quiet time with the document, a lot of one-on-one time to investigate, to get a feel for it, to actually physically work on these sheets of paper. And for me, the take home from that is that there is a person behind this. There is a person who sat down and hand wrote this translation, who went back and did all of these edits and the little editing marks that look just like anything you or I would do today, really brought home for me the fact that Isaac Newton was a person. He was a person who sat at a desk and wrote this manuscript, and I am now sitting at a desk looking at this manuscript that he wrote. And there's a kind of connection there that I just feel incredibly lucky to be able to experience, to have the behind the scenes time and those quiet moments with this document, to feel the humanity in it. That was a really special experience for me.
Sir Isaac Newton sought to understand the nature of transformation through alchemy. As conservators, we study a kind of alchemical transformation of our own, not how to change lead to gold, but how to slow breakdown, how to repair damage and restore use. Though the elements we seek to change through chemistry will not prolong our lives or make us rich beyond our wildest dreams, they also don't seem so entirely different a pursuit from Newton's. Through conservation, we cannot change nature, but we can aim to protect its memory. Every treatment connects past and present. Through chemistry and patience and respect, we sustain what once was fragile until it can speak for itself again. Alchemy once sought to perfect matter. Conservation seeks to protect meaning. Both in their way guard the spark of human curiosity.